right, here we go. Friday. It is the 11th of December. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to take a little bit of a side trip because there's some really cool stuff that is going on. It's in the news. It's going to be impossibly important to your life, my life, everyone's life. And today I want to kind of take a chance to address that now before we get too much further without having talked about it. So today, what we're going to do is we are going to discuss the COVID-19 messenger RNA vaccine that currently is rolling out around the world and will start in America very soon. So please feel free to share this with anyone and everyone that you know. In particular, I've got a great video resource that I'll talk about at the end that you absolutely should watch with some other people and share it, because it does a phenomenal job of showing the exact science that went into getting us to this point. So with that said, excuse me, we are still in our week 1 of Unit 4 in genetics, and we're going to be taking a look at our PowerPoint a little bit. We're going to be finishing up the Ugly Baby Lab for those that have not, but let's just dive in. Yesterday, we finished with these terms. These terms make up the vast majority of all the terms that you will really need for genetics. They are super, super important that you understand all of them. If you have any issues with that, please let me know so that we can start to do some practice. We can organize some materials, because you've got to understand these, especially gene and allele. Those are by far the most important. So once more, remember, we all have genes for all of our traits. We all have genes for hair color and eye color and skin color and stuff like that. The difference is what allele we have for that. So for eye color, you could have alleles for blue colored eyes or brown colored eyes or hazel or green. Each of those colors is a different allele. It's a different version of the gene that everybody shares. Just slight differences. Now, all of this comes from ultimately our DNA. Now, if deoxyribonucleic acid is not something that you are going to remember, that's fine. Just go with DNA. Absolutely fine. And remember, we identified that our genetic material, now these are our nucleic acids, one of our 4 organic molecules. And last unit, we identified that they exist in the nucleus. And that's where the cell keeps them. That's why the nucleus is in charge. And then we also have to look at our ribonucleic acid, or RNA, because this is the messenger that DNA needs. Let me explain why. All right, you can think about DNA like the boss. All right, the boss is in his office. The boss is in charge. If he leaves the office and other people need him, the business has issues. So boss has got to stay in his office where he is. Instead, what the boss will do is they will communicate by sending out letters, emails, memos, whatever you want to call it. But that will tell the other people what they need to do. So DNA is the boss. It stays in its office in the nucleus. It sends out messages. The messages that it sends, that's the RNA. Now, this is the central dogma of all biology. This is the core concept that everything else fits around. This is the glue that keeps it all together. And that statement is that our DNA makes our RNA. Our RNA makes our protein. So this process is how we go from a fertilized cell to the miraculous billions, trillions of cells that we are now. How life works is by following this pattern. DNA makes our RNA. RNA makes the protein. So the boss sends the message, and then the message makes the stuff. Impossibly important for everybody to understand this, especially as we move forward into the age of COVID. Now, how does that work? Well, remember, last unit, we went through the organelles and what they do. We identified that a ribosome is responsible for making protein. So if the last step of this is to turn RNA into protein, there's only one cellular organelle that is responsible for making protein, and that is the ribosome. And so what you see happen is here's our messenger RNA, here is the message from the DNA in the nucleus, and it kind of threads through the ribosome. As it does, these other things come in, they lock in matching the order. We'll talk about this more later in the unit. And that builds step by step a chain of amino acids, which when you have a chain or a polymer of amino acids, that makes a protein. Back in Unit 2, Biochem. So this is the basic science behind how DNA does everything. Now, what I want, we're going to talk more in class. We're going to go on and talk about Gregor Mendel and dominant versus recessive and things like that. But for you folks right now, for anybody watching this, this is what I want you to do next. Here is the link in Schoology. It is from the creator from PBS Digital Studios. It's okay to be smart. The video is called Inventing the COVID Vaccine. Actually, it's called Inside the Lab That Invented the COVID Vaccine. And this video is phenomenal. I will be showing this in class today to everybody here, to people in the Google Meet. Please make sure that you watch it too. And in particular, pay attention for some of these terms, because this is the key for how we're making it. Unlike any other vaccine that we have had on Earth, to my knowledge, this is the first one that is relying entirely on our central dogma for its effectiveness, for its production. Most of our other vaccines, what we do is we take the virus and we kill it and damage it. We heat it up, we break it a little bit so that it really can't do its thing. Then we inject it into your body, and your immune system finds it and fights it, and your immune system has as long as it needs to figure out how to beat it because it can't fight back. This vaccine does not work that way. And I want to leave it to Joe on It's Okay to Be Smart, because he clearly worked real hard on putting this video together, and it deserves the credit. So go watch it. Pause this video, come back here once you're done. All right, so I'm going to assume that by this point, you paused, you went, you watched, you're back. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about how our genetics works. As we talked about yesterday, we mentioned the term dominant versus recessive. Now let's talk about how we're actually going to record and work with them. So dominant alleles are denoted as capital letters. If they are present, then they will appear. Meanwhile, recessive alleles will not appear if a dominant allele is present. They'll be overpowered. They'll be pushed to the background. The dominant allele will take center stage in order to fill up all of the attention and bask in the glory. The recessive allele will take that step back. It doesn't care. So the only time we will see recessive alleles is if you have two of them. If you have one dominant allele, you won't see the recessive. Let's take a look at some examples here. So let's imagine we're looking at the gene for hair color, And there are two different alleles. We have capital B for brown. We have little b for blonde. All right, so brown is our dominant, capital. Blonde is our recessive, little b. If a capital B is present anywhere, the hair color will be brown. If there is no capital B present, the dominant allele is not there, then the hair will be blonde. And so how did we figure this out? There are only going to be two scientists over the course of this entire year that you will need to know for the Regents, and this is one of them. Gregor Mendel is our father of genetics. Very, very quickly, Gregor Mendel worked in a monastery. He was a monk. And he noticed something. Well, the monks need to be self-sufficient, meaning that they need to grow all their own food. They need to make all their own stuff, basically. And so not only was he teaching physics and science, but he was also taking care of their garden. And basically what he started to notice was he started to see patterns in the traits that their pea plants had, just garden peas. And so what he did was he started an experiment on them. And he worked very diligently for years and years and years, just breeding these pea plants together and making sure that very specific plants were the father and very specific plants were the mother to see what the offspring, what the children looked like. And he did this for ages. Now, the traits he was looking at are each of these: the shape of the seed, the color, the flower color, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he took meticulous notes. And when I mean meticulous, he used symbols to denote what was happening. So to put this in perspective, what he would do was he would map out a section of garden. And then he would separate it into certain groups based on what he was testing. And then in each of these sections, he recorded stuff like this. Now, does that mean anything to you? Probably not. Did it mean something to him? Yeah, it did. Did he bother to record what it meant? No, he did not. So what ended up happening was Mendel put together huge notebooks over years and years and years of study using these symbols that he had devised to tell himself what the parents were and then what the offspring's traits were. And so by taking a look at that and organizing it, he was able to start to see patterns forming. Now, that's all well and good, but it doesn't mean much unless you can actually prove it. Now, at this point in history, we were looking for how inheritance worked. We were looking for how we pass traits on and what's the rule governing it. And nobody had the answer. Nobody did. Mendel, this is the man, actually wrote a big paper, like 35 pages about exactly what he discovered. He published it, sent it out to like the best scientists of the day. And everybody ignored him. People didn't even read it. He was just some random dude in some random corner of the world, and people figured, what could he possibly have really found out about this entire problem that was plaguing them? And the bottom line was he had figured it out. It wasn't until much later that his work was, in essence, rediscovered. People basically found a lot of his old papers and notebooks and stuff. And then when they started going through it and realizing they didn't know what his symbols were, but they knew that he was onto something. His numbers worked with what we now understood. And so, unfortunately, posthumously, meaning after his death, Mendel has been awarded the title of the father of genetics because he figured it out before anybody else did. Other people did figure it out, but not until decades after he did. Unfortunately, he never got the recognition that he should have for it because by the time we really discovered that he was right about this stuff, he had already been dead for quite a while. That said, the man seems to have had a good life. He went on to lead his monastery, died at like 87, which is unheard of in the 1800s. So he seemed to do quite well for himself, just never got recognized for science. Now, Mendel gave us the basis for dominant and recessive because as he watched these pea plants generation after generation, what he did was he started to notice those trends. He started to notice that some of them happened more often than other ones do. Kind of like how dark hair is more common than light hair. So we will dive into all of that when I see you folks on Monday. Have a great day. I look forward to seeing everybody in class. And if I'm not going to see you in class, please share that video. Make sure that other people see it. It is important. Have a great weekend.